Hey everyone, and welcome to the second video of this expedition log series. In this video, I'm sharing the making process of these two pages and some of the ideas behind them. We'll start with the right page that continues some of the themes from the page I shared last week. This double spread has a bird theme, so the specimens in the bags match it. We have a feather and some moss that could be from a nest. I covered the making process of these baggies in last week's video, so here I'm just going to show the finishing touches. It's just one of the perks of making a series. And if you remember, the baggie in last week's page was open and it had this cut string detail. So this page continues the specimen theme, but this time the envelopes weren't damaged and the seals were not broken. So after adding the labels, I tied the string around the bags and glued them shut with the enclosure seal. To assemble a page like this, you need to take into account the layering. Basically what I'm saying is that I have to make sure that details that would be beneath the bags are added before I add the bags themselves. Makes sense, right? I added a stamp and some labels, and these labels will be partially visible under the translucent specimen bag, but the bags will also be attached in a way that allows us to lift them and just pick underneath. And this page is about specimens being collected and sent, perhaps to a lab or in the institution that employed our writer. So all the details connect to that. The word destination fits with an address you would put on an envelope, and the labels all connect to collecting, shipping, and receiving specimens. I decided to add the baggies with pins, literally pinning them into the page with sewing pins. And for me, this serves a couple of purposes. For one, it works with the vintage vibe of the journal because pins were used to attach paper before things like staplers became widespread. It also just gives some visual interest, this tiny gleam of metal and the pinpricks in the paper. We could attach an emotional association to this. Words like pin down or prick definitely have those associations. But like the cut butterfly wing in last week's page, the pins have a very logical and functional reason to be here. So we can play with these meanings and decide how to read them and how to tell our story. Because I planned on using pins, I chose a thinner paper for this page. It's actually cut from a paper bag that I crinkled and inked. I could have used cardstock, but that would make the pinning a lot harder, and also I like that the color is the same as a craft envelope that would fit with the theme of the page. I did use a bit of glue on the pins to make sure that everything stays put. It's just a good idea when you add an element that can be moved, especially if the backing is a relatively weak material. To finish the page, I added this filed label at the top because the specimens have been filed and sealed and ready to ship. And then I just added some stamping. So the first stamp that you see is a form number, and we can imagine that this is the form that is needed for submitting the specimens. Then I added some random number stamps, basically. And this is just to give more interest to the page and more of a finished look. I played with different generations of stamping in this case, and if you're not familiar with the term, first generations is just the first time you stamp on the paper. If you stamp again without re-inking your stamp, that would be the second generation, and so forth. And this can be used to get a different shade of the color that you're stamping in, so gray instead of black, pink instead of red, but it can also give a more faded, worn look to the image, which is what I was going for in here. Each generation becomes paler than the one before. So the first number that I added in at the top left was fourth generation, and you can barely see it in the video. Others were second generation, so the image is stronger, but it's still faded enough that everything blends together to the background and fits with the overall worn look that I'm going for with this journal. And this finishes our first page. When we move on to the left page of this double spread. The focus of this page, its main attraction, if you will, is this booklet. I had a printed ephemera piece of the Nests and Eggs of Familiar Birds book, just the cover. And I thought it would be cool to make a little book for it. So I found some pages online that fit the theme, and I'll show you how I bind it. Now, off camera, there was a lot of fascinating work of sizing the pages down to fit the cover, arranging them for double-sided printing, inking the page, printing, cutting, making sure that it's in the right order. It takes some time and it's really not that interesting to watch, so I didn't film it, and instead I'm focusing on the binding because I think that it can be useful and more interesting for you. I use a classic sewing binding that can be used to make yourself a notebook. It's very popular in junk journaling and it's surprisingly simple. So as you just saw, I used a ruler to help me make the holes in even half-inch spaces. I'm using a rather thick thread, so I punctured pretty big holes. If you use a thinner thread, it might be better to puncture smaller holes so they will not be visible in the end. It's a good idea to do all of this on a cutting mat or cutting board because you need some force to go through all the pages, and this could damage your work surface. So after knotting the thread on one side, I used a needle and an embroidery straight stitch. And it's a very simple stitch, but it's very strong because the string doubles up on itself, and it gives a very nice straight line in the middle of our book. The idea of including this booklet is that it might be something that the journal owner used in his work. The specimens on the first page fit with this theme of birds and their nests, so we can imagine that he used this book to identify his finds. The 2 pages in this video are still very much about setting the scene, so all the information that we have so far is about his work. Then we can see that he collects kind of different kind of things from nature. We saw butterflies, so insects, and this time we have birds. So it's a pretty wide range of items already. And full disclosure, I actually made a mistake in the binding. The knot that I made in the beginning should have been in the back. But I didn't realize that I've done it until I was halfway through the sewing, and I figured I'll just fix it in the end. So here I am, fixing. And it's very easy. You just pass the threaded tail through to the back with the needle, and it's already knotted, so I don't need to worry about it coming loose, and I can just cut it off. Off camera, I finished the book by distressing the pages and tearing some of them so that the book would have this well-used look. I adhered the cover to the front page and used some washi tape to cover the sewing and give the booklet a finished look. The booklet will be adhered down on this page, and the background was inked in the same way as the page I shared last week, so if you're interested in seeing how that was done, you can check out that video. It's linked below. I added details in stamping to this background, and I should note that the stamps I used in this video are from a whole bunch of stamp sets, but they're all by Tim Holtz. And I started with this stamp that has a very small handwritten text, and I stamped it in white ink. This adds very delicate detail to the background. Then I used another slightly bigger handwritten image with a second generation stamping in brown. And a word about the inking that I'm doing, you might have noticed that I'm swiping the ink pad on the stamp, not tapping it like I should. And this is just another way to get a more worn image because the stamp is not evenly inked. If you want a crispy, clear image, don't do this. This is the wrong way to get a crispy image. But in this case, because I was going for a worn look, it fits. None of the stamp text in the background is really readable. It's just there to give an idea of a lot of writing and a lot of text. And I decided to add a thread around this booklet, both for interest, but also to just keep it from flapping about. This is a page in a journal that is meant to be flipped through, so it's better to make sure things don't move too much. I tied the thread around just to keep it in place while I'm adhering, but you'll see that I'll change the knot afterwards. This was just to keep things together, make it easier for me when I'm gluing. When I added the glue, I spread it around, but I made sure also to put a nice amount around the string just to be sure it stays put. Anything that is fiber, like strings and fabric, tend to need a bit more glue than the paper. And then I could just place the booklet down on the page where I wanted it. Now, once the glue dried, I could open the book, add some ephemera pieces. There's just a couple of unused labels, so like forgotten unused labels, and then just fidget with the string as much as I like. I do tend to do that. And this finishes this week's double page and video. There's some close-up photos of the pages in my blog that's linked below, and so you can go and check it out and see more of the details. And next week we'll start to seeing more hints about the owner of the journal and build up his story. I'm still playing around with this formats of the videos, so I would really love to hear what you think. Thank you so much for joining me, and see you again next time.